Thank you very much. So my name is Benjamin Mitchell. I'm a partner with a consultancy called Equal Experts. I just love this conference for the range of topics. Sometimes what I'm going to talk about really comes from my experience over 20 years working with teams of teams. I work in a consultancy. We've got hundreds of people helping some clients in the UK, both in government, which is interesting, around the politics, and in the private sector. I'm always so impressed by the range of topics at this conference. And what I'm going to talk about really comes from my own experience studying psychology and what I've done with people. And every now and then at these conferences, I feel anxious about that because I'm not technical and maybe this isn't a topic that's as easy to grasp. It's harder to learn, potentially, although I think everyone finds it important. So I'm just thrilled that you're here, and I get to share some of the ideas that I've worked through. I started my career in psychology, but decided to help in software development teams because I wanted to have more of an impact on more people. But it's been funny working with teams and realizing how important it is to bring in some of the skills I learned around people, particularly from a counseling and therapy background. And so I'm super excited to share them with you here. I'm going to talk about politics and hierarchy. And about 10 years ago, I would have told you that this was a study in other people and the problems that they cause. What I'm instead going to talk about is a journey that I went through where I really blamed others solidly for things that I was contributing to. So I want to share some of that journey and the idea that when we talk about politics and hierarchy, which is a real thing, it's probably something that we're contributing to much more than we think we are. And that once we accept that and look at our own involvement in it, there are some amazing tools and techniques we can use that really do make a load of difference. And they've made a huge difference in my life, both at work and also at home with friends and family. So I'm really excited to share those with you here. To get us in the mood, I want you to think about a situation in your own life where you think you're working with someone directly and you think you're suffering as a result of them using politics or hierarchy against you. I'm not going to ask you to share this, so this is just a thought experiment to ground it for yourself, because I really think that politics and hierarchy aren't something that we can attack specifically, that you can't go at them directly. Just like you can't intervene directly on culture. My name's Benjamin. My parents named me that, and I decided at a certain point that I'd ask everyone to call me that. But every workplace I go to shortens my name to Ben. And I wish I could find the Office of Culture that I could go to sort of say, could I ask for a cultural policy? If I say my name's Benjamin, could you just call me Benjamin? But there's no Office of Culture. And so I don't think there's an Office of Hierarchy, and there's not an Office of Politics either. Where we can make a difference, though, is in the specifics. Who are we talking to? What are we saying with those people? And what's the topic of that conversation? So keep that in mind yourself. What I'm going to talk about, first of all, is some ideas that I thought maybe meant that we didn't need to worry so much about politics and hierarchy in Agile because we have such values of transparency and openness. But I wanted to quickly go through some reasons why I don't think it's enough just to value transparency and openness when dealing with politics and hierarchy, because if that was the case, then things like traffic lights would work as status. Everyone familiar with using a traffic light symbol to say whether the project's red, amber, or green? Do we really believe that that's open and transparent? I mean, there's nothing inherently hidden about choosing a color, and yet I'm often involved in discussions like, maybe instead of red, amber, green, we mean amber red. Because if it's red, it could mean that we want someone to notice and then the hierarchy to take awareness of it and act. But also we might not want that. Because if we make it red, then people are going to think we're in trouble and we're going to be blamed and they're going to be there and it's going to be unproductive. And so I've even seen things like rehearsal meetings where you have to get approval to change the color of your project. So it's not the tool, it's how we use it as humans that makes a difference. And we're all probably aware of watermelon projects with traffic lights that look green on the outside but actually are red on the inside. So it's not just the tool, there's something more going on. And to reframe this, it's sort of like expecting that humans would change things like our body weight just if we had metrics and data. You know, there's a strong belief in the value of evidence-driven discussions, and I do believe that. I'm also curious at the edge of where that stops working, that it's not the lack of an accurate measurement that means I don't gain or lose weight as I intend. There's something else going on. And it even applies in Kanban. You know, it's a pretty simple maths problem. You limit the number of things in a column so that you have fewer things in play and you get them done faster. But I love this tweet, which said the limit was 2, We had 3 items in it. I raised the limit to 3. There are now 4. So we need to do more as humans than just have measurements. We need to see them in the same way, and where there's a gap that violates some of the beliefs we've got, we need to be able to talk about that productively, I claim, in order to reduce what we might otherwise call politics and hierarchy. And this is a quote. There's a theorist who I love who talks about organizational learning, and his thing is that people are all for the truth as long as the truth is not embarrassing or threatening. And that as soon as it becomes potentially embarrassing or threatening for me or other people, I change my behavior in a fairly consistent pattern. I do things like cover things up. I try and control the situation. I pretend that I'm acting rational, and I deny that I'm doing any of this. So just like changing the color of the traffic light to avoid someone looking at me, I won't say that that's what I'm doing. I'll keep that logic secret. But it's fairly common. And I think it's worth keeping in mind. It's not that us humans are bad. It turns out we're wired like this. So we're going to do better when dealing with politics and hierarchy if we keep in mind the way the limits of our skills are often when things are threatening or embarrassing. So now I'd like to talk about a scenario that describes me making many of these errors. And I offer that because it was insightful, very powerful. In fact, I still haven't got over it. I'm talking about it 10 years later. I wanted to do Agile in a company where another consultancy had come through, and they'd done what I thought was a stunt. There was a 2-year-long project with a big, thick requirements document. And the story I heard was that the consultant said, the consultant took the phone book-sized requirements document and threw it in the bin and said, "Why don't you just talk to me about what the system should do?" And this made the hierarchy so irate that I was told, don't even mention the Agile word. So I was in a dilemma because I just certified as a Scrum Master, and I believed that working iteratively would really help this project that I took over that had failed 2 times already. And so I really wanted the project to be a success, but I was too scared to have the discussion about whether Agile was okay or not. So the solution to my dilemma was to do the stand-ups at 4 o'clock in the fire escape and not tell anyone that that was what was going on. And this is like a small kid strategy. Let's just pretend. Because I was in this investment bank where nobody ever left their desk all day except a team of 12 of us that stood in the fire escape. And what was interesting was that I would claim, if you'd listened to me at the time, I would tell you about what a challenging environment, what a political and hierarchical environment it was. And yet here was me acting in a deceptive way to achieve my goals without risking a conversation with anyone else. So I think I was creating the politics that I cared about. Another example from the same project. We developed lots of projects. These are trading products. We developed lots of them. There's a timeline along the bottom and then the stages that it took. So this lean idea, understand what you do, what the value is, what our customers do. And again, it was this theory, if we have evidence, we can make evidence-based decisions. But I was really angry that I was doing all of this work and we were building products that no one wanted. And so I would say I was just sharing the evidence, yet I can't get past the fact I took 3 hours to choose the color scheme to highlight in red when we'd done things that nobody had used. And underneath it all was a very political agenda that I thought they were idiots making decisions about these products. I would have said it in kinder words like, I can't quite understand why we've made these decisions, but at base I thought they were idiots. So again, using data can be effective, but it's worth recognizing how we're contributing to things, the politics and the hierarchy. If you had a video of me, the number of hours I spent in the pub trying to diagnose the toxic political environment. I remember even trying to diagnose the leaders as sheep or foxes or something to try and get a better understanding of their leadership style. Totally ineffective in my life. Didn't do a thing because I think I was creating the toxic political environment that I was complaining about. And one of the biggest moments of insight was after I was frustrated enough to have resigned, they made me. I was chairing a committee meeting about when the 27th or 28th, I forget the number now, product was going to be ready. And after the meeting, a peer of mine said, "Benjamin, when they asked you how long it would be till that next product was ready, how many seconds was it before you bit their heads off?" And I was shocked because my initial response, I did not think I'd bitten their heads off, but I couldn't fault the fact that if this guy was asking me that question, he thought I'd bitten their heads off. And when I thought a little bit about how I'd behaved in the meeting, I think I had. And so suddenly I was really intrigued that I felt very burnt out using all of these Agile lean methods to make things more transparent and to reduce politics and hierarchy. And yet I'd hit this limit where I wasn't having effective conversations with people about what we were doing and how. And it led to me feeling burnt out and leaving. And I didn't want to be in that situation again. And so like a detective, I became really curious at what was going on. And again, this quote I really love, that people blame others and the system like I did, and they deny that they're personally involved, and they deny that they're denying. Like I swear till I was blue in the face that it wasn't me, mate. It was this toxic political environment. You should meet the guys I have to work with. They are... Oof. So what was interesting was then to look at what we could do differently. And here's an idea that I really like from a guy called David Burns, who is a cognitive behavioral therapist. And his thing is, when we look at relationships, we provoke and maintain the exact relationship problems that we complain about. And the challenge is we don't like to realize this. There's more in it to be a victim and to say it's all the other person's fault. There's a big payoff in that. And I wanted to dwell on just briefly, I'm offering this so that I think I can reflect being generous to yourselves. If you are interested, and I hope you are, in looking at how you might be contributing to politics and hierarchy that's causing you a problem, it's often good to start with your own behavior. But this shock, like the head-biting moment, is to realize that how we think we act and how we tell others we act isn't how we actually act. And we're often unaware of it. Because often, I think our theory is, if we were acting ineffectively, we'd know. We'd be able to spot when we're wrong. So I didn't mean to bite someone's head off, but I just thought, well, I'd know when I'd bitten someone's head off. But the challenge with that is it requires knowing what being wrong feels like. And I really like this philosophical question. What does being wrong feel like? So here's Willie E. Coyote, and he's been wrong from about there. Okay, things were going well, and that is wrong. And now this bit is when he's aware he has been wrong. Okay, this is has been wrong. What did the being wrong bit feel like? The being wrong bit felt exactly like being right. So one of the challenges we've got in human relationships is we often can't spot when we're acting ineffectively, although happily other people can. Usually the recipient can, and also friends like the peer who told me I'd bitten someone's head off. So the strongest test of this is to actually tape record your own behavior. And I did this after I'd left this place. I went to become a coach, and I worked with a group, and I said, like on the call centers, I'm recording this for training purposes. Are you okay with that? And they were. There was one meeting which had gone so badly. My heart rate was up. I was sweaty. I thought that wasn't very good. I don't think they'll like that. But I couldn't. I thought, I'll listen to the tape tonight and find out what went wrong. And it was only as I was listening to the tape, I suddenly realized what I had said in the meeting, and I was about to hear myself say on tape. And I had to rip the headphones out of my ears and what I found stunning was that I'd done this, I was in the room, I even knew I'd taped it, I knew I'd listened to the tape, but I'd forgotten this bit, where someone had said something I didn't like, and I thought the right thing to do was to yell at them and say, no, don't say it like that. And to this theory before, I would say, I would not tell you that I acted like that. I wouldn't even tell you that's effective to act like that, and yet I produced it quickly, skillfully, and without effort. And this was a real shock. So for a while, I felt so bad about myself. I used to run workshops seeing if other people made errors like I did. This was at an Agile coaching gathering. We ran a scenario where you had to give feedback to someone on the team. And I asked the coaches, tell me the feedback. Pretend I want to learn. Tell me the feedback. And this is an example. Someone said, your feedback to the team member was poor because it didn't focus on any positive actions. And it also didn't include any examples. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. Like, if I understand you think good feedback contains positive comments and focuses on examples. Did I get that right? And they said, yep. I said, well, what's really interesting to me is in your own statement here, I think you don't provide any examples. Am I right? No examples. And I said, well, there's 2 points that you think are effective. You also focus on positives. Is there any positive in your statement? And he's like, no. And I said, so isn't that amazing? It looks like you've constructed a statement that contains what you believe to be true and effective and negated it in its own statement. Like, were you trying to achieve that? No. But can you see that it's happened? Yes. So this is the trick. And then my other example was there was a group of Agile coaches that they believed that coaching the team was important, and they wanted to understand, are we being good coaches? It's a fair question. The trouble I had was their solution to this problem was to stand at the team's stand-ups and record how transparent the team was on a clipboard, and then secretly take that back to the coaching office and write it up on a wall. So on the one hand, they thought transparency was a good value that should be encouraged, but their own ratings of the team's transparency was secret. And I thought, this is, again, completely contradictory, or at least troubling, minimally. So I got over my need to show that everyone else was as wrong as I was, and then realized, and this is a Buddhist idea that I've come across, that correcting our own behavioral errors where we're being ineffective often requires us to overcome our own ego. And it can feel like a death of the ego. I think the ripping of the headphones out of my ears was my ego crying because it was going to die. And the sense here is once we can let go of that, then we're far more open to being able to look at how we can change our own behavior in order to be more effective. It still does feel like this, though. I wouldn't underplay that. It's an enormous struggle. Sometimes it can take me days until I've sort of come to terms with what's happening. So we've had a look at how we create the politics and hierarchy that we often complain about. I showed you some examples about how the journey for me was having the insight that I was making ineffective. I was ineffective in my own behavior. And then my claim is that we need to be specific and deal with this individually with particular people in particular scenarios. We can't just go at culture and hierarchy abstractly or generically. And so then it becomes focusing on a particular relationship with a particular person on a particular issue. And it's interesting to bring in the frameworks, I find, from relationship counseling or interpersonal therapy. So if you do have a troubled relationship, your options are that you can maintain the status quo, just wait, see if things are different. And that I'm not sort of valuing one choice as higher than the other. I think it's really important that you make choices that are right for you, and that's the same model I use with clients. It's up to them. Maintaining the status quo might be the best thing. It's variable as to whether anything will change, but it could be a better option because maybe you don't feel like you could end the relationship, like you might just leave that employer if you're not working, or change projects. And then you do have an option to work and make it better. But the challenge when you look at working to make it better is your option. So one option is just to sit around and hope that they'll work out how wrong they were, and eventually they'll change. Or you could focus on changing them. But let's do an experiment right now. How many people in the room, by show of hands if you're willing, would like to be changed by somebody else? Yep. Okay, nobody, no hands. Nobody would like to be changed by someone else. So it could just be that we've got a certain group of people here, and the other willing changees are just not at the conference. Or this might be a reflection, I think more probably, that nobody likes being changed. People are open to change and open to advice if they want it, but trying to get them to change is rarely likely to be successful. It's probably likely to frustrate you and them. It's like, but it's very common. I remember when I first tried to do self-organization, and it became quickly apparent that my strategy was, we can self-organize as long as you pick the option I think you should have. So sometimes we don't think we're trying to change them, but actually we are. And then there is an option to change yourself. And the great benefit about changing ourselves is that we have a lot more power than we think we do, I believe, in transforming troubled relationships. And I'm really keen to talk about some of the methods and tools that I've used to do that at the end of this presentation. So thinking back on that scenario of the person again, let me ask the question, who do you think is more responsible? So just show of hands if you're willing. Who thinks the other person is more responsible for the challenges you've had with them? Yep. And who thinks they were more responsible? Okay, so it's about probably 70-30 on the other person. And this is important, I think, because one of the things is whether if we do try and change things, whether we actually want that outcome or not. I really like this idea from therapy that sometimes there are great tools, like in cognitive therapy, you can challenge people's irrational beliefs, get them to switch should statements for more rational statements, and people do report feeling better. But what they found was that sometimes people just don't want to feel better. They actually like the benefits of being as they are. So rather than wasting our time, wouldn't it be better if we could draw that out from people and help them make a more informed choice about what they actually want? And so the idea here is thinking about that scenario with a person that's treated you in a political way or used hierarchy against you. Let's, as a thought experiment, say that I'll give you a magic button. And if you press this magic button, all of your problems will disappear with this person. You're going to wake up after pressing the magic button, and you're going to feel warm and loving towards the other person, and all of the friction and tension is going to disappear. Would you press the magic button? Show of hands, who would press the magic button? Okay, many people. Anyone wouldn't press the magic button? Yeah, a few people. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here. There are some people that I've worked with that I've just disliked so much that I really don't want to look at improving that relationship. I don't think I've got time. I prefer to do something else, and that's fine. No one's saying you have to. But if you do want to change it, it's worth thinking through whether you really want this. I worked with someone and did this thing, and they didn't want to press the magic button. And we went through, and they were just really, really delighted. And I was happy in a way. I was a bit sad because I would have liked to use some methods and helped, but they had the help they wanted. And it saved both of us spending our time on a problem that was unlikely to move forward. So one of the things that even if you have pressed the magic button is just to think through what you have to give up. And I like this paradoxical approach here, that actually there are some huge benefits of blaming other people. Anyone want to volunteer some? What's the benefits of blaming the other person? No? Okay, I'll fill them in. So some of the benefits of blaming the other person is you get to feel right. You get to feel totally right. You get to feel like a victim. You get to enjoy the drama, like the number of hours I've spent talking to friends and feeling closer, actually, as a result of getting sympathy from friends because of I was going to say a swear word, I just stopped myself, the people who are very poor that I work with. So there are huge benefits of blaming other people. And one of the things that's worth thinking through is definitely these benefits, not just the disadvantages of blaming. We all sort of know we should be better. But then I also think, like one of the delights of blaming other people is you get to plot about thwarting them or getting them back. I spent several days recently thinking about how I was going to blank someone in a team meeting because I felt that they treated me so badly. The enjoyment I got from thinking about being passively aggressive towards them, in fact, probably was actually openly aggressive in what I was planning, was huge, a massive payoff. And I think it's worth admitting to that sometimes Agile talks about humans as being totally positive, and we forget that there are darker motives, that we do want to win and beat and punish other people, and there can be payoffs for this, and that's just part of who we are as humans. It's worth thinking it through, though, particularly when you're looking at relationship issues, because if you are still hanging on to blaming other people, it's like kryptonite. The other idea I like is if we don't go through this, they call it an agenda setting exercise, do you want to press the magic button? What would you have to give up if you do want to create the change? Is that it helps people make a choice, and it saves you pushing help. Like in the therapy world, they say that, it's David Burns, he's a bit provocative with this, but the number one failure of helping is pushing help. And I think if you remove help there and say agile transformation or rolling out Kanban, Lean or anything, I think it's the same thing. We do have methods like in therapy that really will help many people, and there's evidence for it. But helping or pushing it out on people that don't want to and aren't making informed choices is unlikely to be successful for you or them, or it's likely to be much harder work. And I really encourage more people to think that one through in the work that they're doing. That's something that I'm really focused on. So we have more power than we think to transform troubled relationships if we're prepared to stop blaming the other person and focus on changing ourselves. So now I'd like to go into the good stuff. How do you make things better if you have decided to reduce politics and hierarchy by stopping blaming the other person and focus on changing ourselves? And this is the model that I really like, that we have a way of looking at other people, ourselves, and the task, and then using that to choose what behaviors we use in order to get the results that we want. And people might have heard of the idea of single loop learning. Single loop learning is the idea in this scenario where you just change your behaviors. So if you didn't get the result you wanted from the person, try doing things like don't say the word but, say and. That's a behavioral change. And you can try that, and sometimes that helps. Usually, I think in issues of interpersonal challenge, it's likely that you need to change the way you're looking at the scenario and the behaviors, and we call that a double loop. So we don't just try acting differently, we also try thinking differently. And I'd like to go through two things. One is the mindset work, how we frame things, and then introduce 5 behaviors that I think really make a difference and have helped. So the first one is the mindset, and I break this down into 3 parts: how you're seeing yourself, how you're seeing the other person, and how you're seeing the goal or the relationship. So the first one is, often when you're in a situation where you're finding it politically challenging or you're suffering from the hierarchy, you've probably got the idea that you understand the situation correctly and you have the right answer. That is going to be challenging, I think, in terms of changing how you react and interact with the other person. What can be more effective is to reframe it and think, I have some information, but I might not see or understand everything. Like in that scenario with the products that I couldn't understand why they were inventing them, some of them actually implemented an ability to do things that the bank had never done before that powered the next 3 years of the bank's future. So I was totally missing that perspective at the time. And then the key for me is to increase your curiosity. And I don't know if Columbo, I'm sure Columbo is probably overdubbed here in Europe. Columbo is my reference because he's always curious and inquisitive. I'm thinking if I'm stuck and I'm probably being ineffective, I think, what would Columbo do? Get like Columbo, get curious, like detach a bit from the scenario, think about what I may not be seeing or understanding, and get curious. The second thing is from when I first started software development, I read a book from Microsoft that was about the psychology of a C++ team. I've forgotten the name of it, but it had this great idea that sometimes people flip the bozo bit. That's why I've got the picture of Bozo the clown. And it's I don't know if you can relate. It gets to that point where you're thinking, that guy or that woman just what an idiot, like just a complete bozo. I put them in the bozo camp, and that switches. Friends of mine even talked about welding the bozo bit shut. Like they were so certain this person was a bozo, they were just putting him in there forever. And there's a fantastic book called Leadership and Self-Deception that uses the metaphor of putting other people in the box. And it's that point when you stop regarding the other human as a human. So the test is, am I thinking and treating this person as I'd like to be treated? Pretty simple stuff, but harder to implement. And can I think about their objective goals or needs, or am I just seeing them as an obstacle or an object? And I hear language like those architects in their ivory towers. Usually that's a giveaway to me that someone's put someone in the box, because actually it's Dave and he's got 2 kids and he's struggling with a mortgage and he's trying to learn how to ride a bicycle. And that's a very different frame. Those architects, the PMO, let me tell you about the PMO, or a project manager or the executive. I think we do it far more than we think and to the hierarchy, and it has a huge contributions. So it seems like a glib point, but massively powerful. Can you step back from the situation and see the other person as a human and think, if you were in their shoes, how you'd like to be treated? And then the final thing is to focus on the goal. And in a cultural reference to my birth in Australia, these are goals in Australian football. But the goal really often is, when you're in a bad interaction, is to get the other person to see things my way. There was a review we did of a project at Equal Experts where someone said that they weren't listening to me, but it turned out that what listen to me meant was implement my ideas the way I thought they should be. So we're often very fixed when we're in challenging situations about getting people to do what I think is right, whereas a more effective frame is to focus on combining our knowledge in order to make the best choice. And then the key one, and I got this, I was in a personal situation where someone I was close to suffered an eating disorder, and it's pretty obvious from the outside that they're not eating and they need to eat, but it turns out that that's totally unhelpful to suggest. And so I got into the literature around working with schizophrenia, or anosognosia it is, where people don't believe they're sick, because that was the situation I had with the person close to me. They didn't think they were sick, but we needed to achieve a goal together. And one of the things I thought was interesting is that just focusing on the outcome that you want, get them to see things my way, just eat, was totally ineffective. But what does work, even in situations where there's proper psychological disorder, is to focus on what they want and what you want, and you're far more likely to get things from strengthening the relationship than continuing to argue. I just think that's a huge mindset thing. If you're having problems with hierarchy or politics at work, rather than focusing on trying to convince them with the strength of your argument, go back and focus on how can we work this through together? How can we form a relationship? So those 3 things, how I see myself, how I see you, and how I see the goal or the relationship, are part of the reframing. I think they're really helpful to think about first before you then get into the behaviors. But I want to get into the behaviors now. So that's the model again. We've been through the mindset. Let's look at, given that mindset, what behaviors can you use? And I hope that there's some really practical things in here that you can take away and even practice before the end of the day that will help achieve great results, because they've really been transformational for me. So I've looked at many models, and this is the one that I think is the simplest and most helpful in terms of description and as a tool to help. So David Burns has this idea of 5 secrets of good communication, and the idea is that you listen with your ear. So that's the first thing. When you're encountering politics or hierarchy, rather than continuing to tell someone, see if you focus on the listen first. You'll find it's a lot better. And the 3 aspects of it are empathizing more with the other person's thoughts and feelings, assertively sharing how you feel and see the situation, and then the key thing is bringing that mindset idea is continuing to treat the person with respect. So those 3 things: listen with your ear, break down into 5 very practical behaviour methods that you can use that have had a massive effect in my own life. We're going to go through them one at a time. So the disarming technique, thought and feeling empathy, asking questions or inquiry are part of empathy, and then using I feel statements to share how you're feeling predominantly about the world. And then the final one has an unfortunate name in stroking. There isn't a better one. It's totally okay if the use of that word, not the wrong use of that word. But it really means conveying respect for the other person, even in potentially what feels like the heat of battle. So the disarming technique, I relate to Mr. Miyagi here. I don't know if anyone else was born in the 70s and watched The Karate Kid, but you just let it through. If you think that someone is saying something critical about you, the tendency we all have is to defend ourselves. So the best example of this in interpersonal situations is one person will say to the other one, "You're not listening to me." And the other person will say, "I am." And there's a strange paradox approach here, where if you defend yourself in the face of a criticism, you nearly always prove the criticism true. Like if someone says you're not listening and you tell them you are, totally not a listening behavior. Okay, there's no listening at all in that response. So good luck with that argument. It seems illogical, and I don't think it will be effective. So the other thing is, and this is hard because it will challenge. I think it has for me my sense of being right. I really want to be right and truthful. So the idea here is, rather than defending yourself in the face of a criticism, is you find a grain of truth in what the other person's saying and find a way of agreeing with them. And the behavior that's really simple to implement, and I encourage you to practice this if you want today, is if you think someone's criticized you, say you're right. Okay, just start with you're right, and then see what your brain fills in next. Okay, so that will kick you into the right way of thinking. You're right. And then see what you can do to find a grain of truth. And you don't have to totally agree with it. Like this is not truth and justice, but just find something to agree with it. So if someone says you're not listening, you might say, I think you're right. I've been thinking to myself, I'm not listening either. And I imagine that you must be finding this pretty frustrating. I can relate to feeling frustrated when people don't listen to me. Can you tell me more about it? And so the change is phenomenal. You can even run, for those coming on Friday, we'll do this in the workshop, but you can even run this as an experiment. Get someone to criticize you and just practice saying you're right, and try the alternative, practice saying, defending yourself hard. It's amazing. Just the difference in energy between finding a grain of truth versus defending yourself is superb, is dramatic. So the challenge is not doing it genuinely. I was teaching a group at work about this skill, and I realized the night before my daughter had said to me, I don't think you're being very fair. And I said, "Oh, you don't think I'm being fair, do you?" which was terrible, totally defensive. But I even went back to her. I told her in the workshop, and then went back to her that night and said, last night you said that I was being unfair, and I thought about it, and I think you're right. I was unfair. Like, how was that for you? And she said, it was a bit hard, But anyway, I don't mean to demean or diminish the quality of the conversation we had. It was a really good conversation that we had. I felt much closer to her as a result. So that's the disarming technique. Simple on the surface, but find something to agree with, even if it's blatantly wrong, illogical, or exaggerated. And this will challenge you because it will seem totally unreasonable, unfair, and unjust that you have to do this, but you can. And I encourage you to try it and see how it works. The next step is thought or feeling empathy. So thought empathy is just paraphrasing the other person's words. And this is a massively underused skill in nearly all work situations I observe, and often ones I'm involved in. That if you listen to a group, very few times do people actually just play back what they heard the other person said. Instead, it seems to be a game of, if you've got a good idea and you haven't heard anyone else say it yet, just add it when the other person's finished speaking. Or if you can't wait long enough, add it before, and see how it goes. So thought empathy is just playing back the words that I heard. So I heard you say ... And that's quite useful, because if you do it like that, you don't actually have to agree with it. You just have to reflect it back, because it helps people feel listened to and understood. And genuinely, you'll find that the goal here is to try and walk in their shoes, see the world through their eyes. Feeling empathy is perhaps a more challenging one in the workplace, though, because it depends, I think, on the strength of relationship. Sometimes people are a bit uncomfortable using feeling words. I think in good teams I've seen them used well, and particularly if the feelings are used in a non-weaponized way. So if you're not saying you feel angry with a tone that says you should not, and you're bad for doing so. Okay, if it's more like, my sense here is that you're feeling angry, it really can help encourage the conversation. And so the things that are challenging about this is you probably think you're doing it, but you're not. So you might think you're focusing on feeling words, but you won't be. And then you'll be adding commentary rather than just playing back the words that you heard. You'll be adding your view and evaluation. So you're saying you're struggling, and the person might not say they're struggling. They might just say, I find it difficult when Barry turns up late for stand-up. So doing it accurately is a challenge. The final thing in the first part of empathy is inquiry, which is asking gentle, probing questions to learn more about how the other person is thinking or feeling. And that's pretty much how it is. Your goal really is to get them to continue to speak. Tell me more is the frame. So if you want a crutch to practice this, and I'd encourage that, tell me more. Can you say some more about that? How were you feeling when you said I wasn't listening? It just keeps them in the conversation. The downside is adding your own commentary to it, or asking in a stereotype way. You sound like a robot, the therapist. Tell me more. Tell me more. And I should say in all of this, if it's not already obvious, practicing with your kids is a sensational practice area because A, they're around all the time, they can't escape, and B, they give you great feedback. So, and expect to be wrong, but these skills, sometimes I think that they sound very simple. Actually, the application's really hard. And it's a bit like sort of describing a piano. A piano is pretty simple in abstract. You press the key and a note plays, but to actually play beautiful music is far more than just knowing there are 6 notes and where you press them. It's a matter of combining these together skillfully. And so I found a great opportunity to use this in my own life, and the payback is phenomenal. The feeling of closeness and connection that I get from people in doing this is really rewarding. So that's empathy. The assertion side of things is I feel statements. And the idea here is you use the frame I feel to focus on you rather than the other person. And then you try and name your emotions. Some of the challenges here is you might say things like, I feel you're not listening. Okay, so it's an I feel statement that doesn't contain a feeling, and it also doesn't focus on you. It focuses on them, and it's an evaluation. So those are some of the challenges. And then the other thing is lashing out at the other person. And the final thing, I think a more advanced thing, is sometimes it can be challenging to say how you feel because you're still blaming the other person for the feeling. So I feel frustrated, but actually I feel frustrated because it's your fault. And so the idea is you share how you're feeling, but again, not in a weaponized way. You're not blaming or punishing or telling the person off. You're just saying, I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling frustrated. Okay, and the final one is respect, which is affirmation and stroking, which is... And I used to wish I didn't have to work on this. I wish we could just be reasonable, logical, reasoning people, and I didn't have to relate to this. But this one pays off amazingly, and payoff makes it sound like it's a trick or a manipulation. It's just genuinely expressing positive regard for the other person. So, in terms of you as the audience, I'm just so grateful that you've chosen my talk amongst the other talks here, and you're open to hearing about topics that seem quite a long way from technical. It really warms my heart to see so many people interested in that. It just generally makes me feel better and the other person feel better. And if you're in tension and you're not agreeing, it really just calms the situation down because it makes it harder for you and the other person to see yourselves as obstacles to overcome or achieve. And this really is an embodiment of that mindset thing about seeing the other person as a human. And so you might sort of stop the conversation and say, look, I just want to stop and say how much I respect that you're here with me talking this through. I'm feeling that this has been challenging or tiring, and I'm feeling encouraged that we're committed to sitting down and talking, and I really appreciate your connection with it. Just changes the tone of the conversation instead of seeing them as an object or an obstacle to overcome. So those are the 5 secrets. I encourage you to try and practice these because, as I say, doing this, what I've done now is described to you a piano. It has black keys, white keys, and a foot pedal. Whether you can play music or not is a complete different scenario. The tools are easier than you might expect to practice. I would say try the disarm technique before the end of the day, particularly. If you feel someone, you probably need to detect that's a criticism. When you think to yourself, I think this person's criticizing me, start with you're right and go from there and see what it does in terms of changing the scenario. I encourage you to look more at them and then practice. Like I say, practice with children, practice with friends. A lot of this, I take a lot from looking at how do we get people to behave in disaster scenarios, like flight problems. If you're a pilot, you need to practice being in that situation under those conditions for extended periods of time. It's the same thing with difficult communications. If you're finding conversations difficult, practice. And the practice can even be write down a couple of lines, what they said to you, what you said back. And then the best thing, actually I forgot this, the best thing is this is a diagnostic tool. When you're in a situation with a person and you think that communication hasn't been successful, write down what you said and what they said. Just take 1 or 2 lines. You don't need very much at all. And then ask yourself, do I see evidence of good communication as defined by these skills? So do I see disarming, empathy, inquiry, I feel statements, or affirmation? And if you don't, I would say that's probably more likely to be poor communication. And then the challenge is to think, if I practice these skills, write out again what you'd say to the person and practice writing those skills over and over again. I've done exercises like continuing with a pad of paper to criticize myself and practice disarming, particularly ones that I know are difficult. So it's not just a tool to produce new behavior, it's a diagnostic tool for understanding when things go wrong. Did you see evidence of those? If not, what would it look like if you did, and practice that again? So there we are. The summary, we often create the hierarchy and politics that we complain about. We blame others and the system because it's just so painful on us and our egos to acknowledge how we might be contributing. We can change. It's going to be more successful if you give up blaming the other person, and you might not want to, so don't, ask yourself, are there benefits of continuing to blame? Because sometimes you might choose that, that's fair. Then get really specific. You can't do this in general. There's no office of culture or office of politics or office of hierarchy, but you can make a difference in terms of how you act and react with particular people in particular scenarios. Then change that frame around what you're seeing for yourself, for them, and the joint goal, and then practice those 5 secrets. The 5 secret stuff, I use this every day at work with all of the teams I work with over and over again. I've also used it for myself when I felt anxious, when I felt depressed. It contributed to me meeting my wife. It helped me when my mum had depression. It helps me today. So I'm clearly, personally, such a fond recipient of all this information. And he's got an amazing podcast where he does live therapy sessions with counselors to demonstrate these techniques in practice. And there's 130 hours of it online. So I'd encourage you to engage. He does a podcast. He does a Facebook video every Sunday night. So if you're interested, if I've encouraged you to be curious and interested in this, please look David Burns' material up because I found it literally changed so much of my own life. So there we are. Please rate this session. I'd love feedback, what you liked, what you didn't like, and I'm going to be around for the rest of the day. I'd love to have conversations, and maybe we've got time for a few questions. Thank you very much.